Hi, and welcome back to ConTinual. I'm your host, Jim Nettles, and tonight we're going to be taking a look at what makes comedy horror work. Because God knows, most comedy is kind of tragic and most horror is funny as hell. So let's see who is coming along for this particular little nightmare of amusement for the evening. So, Samantha, you're up first.
Hello, I'm Samantha Bryant. And in long form, I write the menopausal superhero series, and in short form, I write a lot of horror. And as I was looking at it, I realized I write more horror comedy than I realized I did.
Ms. Carr.
Why, hello there. I am the one, the only, the R.E. Carr, author of 21 novels, if you can believe it. And unfortunately, many of them are horror comedy. Not always intentional, but it happens. When I'm not writing about vampires having balls, but only the male ones, I deal with a demon being summoned via burrito. If that ain't funny, I don't know what is.
I'll save that joke for later. Layla.
Hi, I'm Layla Dorine. I write LGBTQ fiction and romance, heavy on the bikers, the rockers, the shifters, all kinds of shifters. The more exotic shifter, the better. And I am also the former editor of a horror dark fantasy magazine called Seasons in the Night.
Jenny?
Hi, I'm Gini Koch. I write the Alien Catherine Kitty Cat series for Doll Books, now for Gingerbread Publishing. I also write under a variety of pen names in all lengths and genres. And when I write horror, it's usually short fiction. And I write that as J.C. Koch.
And Ken?
I'm Ken Lange. I write science fiction, fantasy, and lit RPG, and there's quite a bit of comedy, horror, and all that. I don't know if I intended to be funny at the time, but it turns out that I was. So,
so I want to kind of start with this notion because, again, one of the hardest things to write and to do is comedy. We hear this, right? Because you're trying to hit the notion of not necessarily laugh out loud funny. I mean, a lot of what all of us write is not necessarily the laugh out loud sight gags, except for Ms. Carr. A lot of the time it's absurdity. It's taking things and twisting them to their, the furthest curves. It's how we play with this. Versus, I think horror is a lot easier to describe and to come down. But hitting the tone and bringing the two pieces together, I think, is often kind of that magic. And sometimes you don't know whether you hit it or not. Or like Ken, you didn't intend to, but what the hell? We're writers. We'll just take what we get. So, Samantha, for you, what is it that is trying to hit the blend between the two? Are you trying to go for more of the comedy? Are you trying, how are you playing the game?
So I think horror and comedy actually have a whole lot in common. In some ways, they're two sides of the same coin. They're both about a setup and a payoff. They're both about anticipation and tension, and then the release of that tension. And so I think that's why they come together so often, is that they are in some ways the same thing. I also think that's why so many actors who are known as comedic actors will come out in a horror movie and just stun people because they're like, how can that be Robin Williams? And you're like, oh, there's nothing scarier than comedy, honestly. I don't think I usually set out knowing I'm going to be writing horror comedy. I just have a little, seed of a story. I sit down and I start writing, and sometimes it's funnier than other times.
So, Ms. Carr, speaking of anticipation.
Oh, you mean letting the intentional comedy writer on to the panel?
So, I mean, for you, what is it about playing with comedy and horror?
Well, they always say dying is easy, comedy is hard, so comedy horror is just a way of making the comedy easier. No, I find, just if you've gone through some shit in your life, as we all have, some people deal with horrific, tragic things through laughter. It's the only thing that keeps them sane. I happen to be one of those people, and I like to distill it into my work. When I first started writing about vampires, no shade, because I do believe that all bestsellers have their place. It started as a rant against Twilight. And not just Twilight, it was Interview with the Vampire. It was all the things that made vampires silly. But I also, on the flip side, loved them. So I wanted the blood and the gore and the guts and the kittens in a blender. And mixing that with comedy was how I finally just made writing click. And I think if you find that balance, it becomes addictive. And thus, a lot of my books have comedy and horror. And it's harder for me to actually intentionally write something serious. I tend to be more like the anime style. I start as the comedy, and by episode 23, I'm making you all cry and be horrified at the blood and guts that have happened.
Layla?
My characters are absolute shitheads, and they run the story. So, if something has happened in the story and the characters are scared, the way that they react to it, I find myself laughing because, you will have the joke of, great, now we're going to end up like so-and-so dumbass running through the woods in high heels, getting, chopped to pieces because we came out here. And they will rant to each other in the dialogue. And it's never meant to be funny. It's meant for them to kind of diffuse the fact that they're scared absolutely shitless because they've done something stupid. And they probably aren't going to admit to whoever is their partner or, in a lot of my daddy, but they're not going to tell daddy that they just scared the crap out of themselves. They are going to run around and try and fix it and rationalize, and they're going to joke with each other because I love to write poly. So, you get that little and that pet who are just like, oh shit, I can't believe we fucking did this, Yeah, I know, I used mine before the 20 minutes, oops. But, they will do these things. Like, I just had a character drag one out of the woods, and this is a very poly book, so it's 4 M's. And one's scared of a storm. They were playing flashlight tag. He drags the one that's scared out of the woods and then, pushes him at their daddy and then runs back into the woods at night with a flashlight in a storm to go find their pet because he knew which direction he ran and thinks he can find him. Now, meanwhile, of course, you've got to have the miss each other in the dark of the storm and one gets back without the other. And now everybody's panicking and a few jokes pop out about, the lightning's going to flash and they're going to see a face in the window and they're all going to have dropped dead of fright by the time he gets back to the cabin. But they take on the story. I just sit here and type and hope I can keep up with them when they do these outlandish things because I don't want to miss a single second of their absurdity.
All right, Jenny, how about for you?
I'm actually very intentional in writing. Since Touched by an Alien, where the voice came out, very snarky. I basically built a career on sarcasm and snark, which I'm very grateful for because I'm very fluent in both of those. I like the horror elements because it's hard to be funny all the time. I will tell you, if you are expected in a series that you're going to make people laugh and then you have to kill characters people love, and you have to make them laugh in the next chapter, that's really hard work. And normally after I finish one of the books in the Alien series, I turn around and I write a horror short where I don't have to be funny, and the bad guys can win, and everyone can die, and that's okay, because it's horror. So most of my horror, you're maybe not realizing to me, it's funny. I find children, and I am a mother and a grandmother and everything else, and I find children to be very horrifying. And so a lot of my horror has kids in it being evil, because I can easily believe that. And there's a part of me that thinks that's funny, but you, the reader, may not find it as funny as I do. So for me, I rarely tend to do funny horror, when I'm doing that, it's paranormal. So I'm doing it with all the undead, which depending on how you're drawing them, they either go into paranormal or they go into horror. A vampire with blood dripping down, ripping your throat out, I find that horrific. A vampire flouncing about, complaining about how bad the sunlight is, that's paranormal humor for me. So I don't really write, though I like horror comedy. It's about the only horror I can watch because I'm a scaredy cat. So like Zombieland, that's my ticket right there. But writing it, I tend to leave horror. I know what I'm sniggering at, but you, the reader, probably don't. But I'm writing it because finally I have a few minutes to not have to make somebody laugh.
Ken?
It turns out that I'm actually just mean-spirited, and people think I'm being funny. So,
Not those of us that know you.
Yeah, well, and like for instance, a book I'm writing right now is taking place in a dungeon, and one of the chapters is called Hentai Porn, and the next one was If Vaginal Dryness Was a Person. Now, both of those are just mean-spirited toward certain characters, but people will find those particular lines amusing. But it's just true that I tend to be mean-spirited towards some of my characters, and people just think that I'm actually making a joke. So it's never been really intentional on my part. So occasionally, I guess I have made a few jokes, but I'm not actually that funny. So
Aw, don't sell yourself short.
no, I actually am short, so that's okay.
See?
And it
just did one.
See, came in at a discount, a little short. I just
There you go, 10% off.
No.
So looking at the notion of comedy horror, and I think we've kind of hit on this and since all of us are sort of in a certain age bracket, we might have grown up on a lot of 80s horror, right? So if we look at everything going from Evil Dead to a lot of Freddy, and a lot of what we saw in terms of horror, it was not the torture porn of today. It was, it was really absurdity, right? It was, look at the tropes. How stupid can you be to be, oh yes, we're going to go skinny dipping in the lake in high heels. All right, now we know what kind of movie we're in. So Rachel, what are some of the influences that you find that sometimes find their way onto your page?
Oh, you knew. You just went straight for the jugular, didn't you? With a handle like Total Recar. You think I like 80s stuff or something like that?
No idea whatsoever.
Definitely Fright Night. Fright Night in the 80s. I said, I write 2 series with vampires in it, so clearly I have Lost Boys and Fright Night. I just find them ridiculous wellsprings of I love taking the absurd and mixing it with the classical, because Fright Night has the horrifying villain. Jerry Dandridge kills women. He's gross when he is a vampire. He does bad things. He has that Gollum thing that just melts. Still. But yet you have Peter Vincent. I love the idea of a character who at first takes themselves too seriously, but deeply knows that they're a fraud. And then that gets reversed, because if anyone who has lived their life suffering from imposter syndrome, to have a moment where the person who is the fraud actually comes through and saves the day and finds that faith in themselves, I just found that character archetype as something that seeps deeply into what I write. And obviously, if I can put anything with Arnold Schwarzenegger, there's just something about quips and one-liners and ridiculous caps to over-the-top violence that... Is it high art? Not necessarily, but it brings joy, and it can just be so fun to inject into what could otherwise be a fairly straightforward horror story.
All right, so Layla, how about you? Doesn't have to be 80s, but what are some of the influences that might make their way in for you?
Honestly, I have some wonderfully, ridiculously snarky friends. One of who is my roommate, who majored in film, and her focus was horror. So we have binged movies and shredded them. I have another friend I video watch movies with, and part of our fun is to shred the movie back and forth for all of the ridiculous things. And so my characters kind of soak all of these things up by osmosis. These conversations about, okay, seriously, hey, I just heard this, really creepy thing. Let's go check it out. No! Please turn around, go back to your car, start it up, drive back to the nearest lit area, and don't wind up dead. And we will be yelling at the movie. And in fact, in about 25 days, I'm going to be visiting one of those friends. And in the evenings, that's our plan, is to watch movies right and just have fun making fun of the absolute ridiculousness of horror movies. Ooh, metal on metal, isn't that creepy? Let's go into the dream and see if we can... No! I'd have been drinking No-Dos, crushing that stuff up in my Coke, whatever, to stay awake. I'd have been mainlining coffee. I'm not meeting Freddie. You people are dumb as I don't know what. No! Like, these are the conversations that we have, and then when I'm sitting down writing, the echoes of all those conversations are playing in my head. And that's where the funny about the scary will come out in my books. Because there will be some truly scary moments. And the characters will just be snarking at one another like me and my buddies do. Because why not? Why not?
All right, so Gini, knowing that we've listed some of the films that absolutely terrify you, because we've settled that fact in some prior conversations.
FYI for this panel, Fright Night scared the crap out of me. I never laughed. I was sitting there trying not to cry with my husband's youngest brother, who I call my little brother too. And he's like, "It's funny." I'm like, "It's not. It's not funny." Okay.
Told you dying was easy. Comedy was hard.
Yeah. Dying was very easy. I found no comedy in it.
All fun and games till someone goes outside and gets their head chopped off.
Exactly, right? I'm going to be honest and truthful. My comedy horror background, Scooby-Doo. Okay? That was my speed from childhood on to now. Right? It's always going to be a man in a mask. So, what that taught me was that the people closest to you and around you are probably the creepy ones, and probably the people doing bad things. So Scooby-Doo is a very good thing to, subtly tell kids, that creepy janitor? Don't go near him alone, right? Hey, is that principal acting strange? Don't go to his office, right? So it was a lot of stranger, not as strange danger as you think it is. And then the only other thing I could actually handle, though it was usually for me with horror, about 10 years after it's come out, I can probably watch it, because all the techniques, horror tends to be very low budget, so all the techniques they're using to scare you like a jump scare have made it into mainline movies and mainstream movies so that I can watch it without But I found Alien boring when I finally got to watch it, but I don't like Ridley Scott's direction. So, but I thought Aliens was great because I love James Cameron's direction. Are they both equally scary? Technically, yes. One bored me, one I was revved up for. But an actual horror movie that I liked, that I only watched because, also true confession time, my main requirement in visual entertainment is good-looking leading men. So I will go to see things that I shouldn't because there's a good-looking leading man. In fact, we talked about Crimson Tide on one of the last panels Layla and I were on, and it's I was reviewing and I for an outlet, and I wanted that one. Everybody else, we were on a call. They said, Gini, are you aware that it's horror? I'm like, what? They're like, yeah, she's focused on Charlie Hunnam and Tom Hiddleston. It's scary. I'm like, oh, someone else gets that. Give me a spy picture.
I found that was a comedy.
Right? Okay, but I can't handle any of this stuff. So the only
Sorry.
thing I was ever been able to handle reasonably close to release was Tales from the Crypt Demon Knight because it stars Billy Zane. And
Ooh.
I could handle that. My daughter and I decided, because he also did a stint on Charmed as a demon. And it's like, wow, we really better hope when the demon comes as Billy Zane that he's the good demon, not the bad demon. Because if you're relying on us to say no to Billy Zane, it's just not going to happen.
Not gonna happen.
Oh, yeah.
Note
that's
to
one of my
self.
catnips. Yeah. So Demon Knight, Tales from the Crypt. That's the other thing. And it is funny. It actually is comedy horror, especially Billy Zane. His lines are hilarious. So that's like my earliest grown up comedy horror is Tales from the Crypt, Demon Knight. Otherwise, I'm just a Scooby-Doo girl all the way.
Yeah, we all know that Scrappy Doo is one of the most terrifying things to
He
ever
is,
come.
and he is evil incarnate. So
Yep.
Should have been a
I
12.
own that Crimson Tide movie. I watch it quite frequently. It is definitely a very nice visual of Charlie Hunnam.
Don Hiddleston, right? That's where I
Yes.
wanted it. I was fortunately kept away. There's no way I could have made it to that movie at all. Okay.
It's really not that bad, I promise.
It really
Oh,
isn't.
you lie like a wet rug girl. Don't even try. Don't even
Again,
try.
we're back to Fright Night still terrifies her.
Yes,
To be
Fright
fair,
Night's
though, Fright
crazy.
Night had Chris Sarandon, okay, and that was a fairly fine gentleman.
Yes, and the kids. I have always from early days. I had a crush on Roddy McDowell. Okay, so Roddy McDowell's in it. It's got to be good, right? I love Roddy McDowell. Oh my God, no, I still can't watch it. No, I'm not going near Crimson Tide. I just now have learned that any movie Rachel recommends, I need to run in the opposite direction, most likely. You can try to look innocent.
My favorite films are Moonstruck, Moulin Rouge, and Beauty and the Beast.
I hated Moulin Rouge. That's another panel.
Okay, now we know. If
That's a different panel.
Different panel.
whatever I recommend, Ginny will not like.
I like Beauty and the Beast.
Okay.
So, Ken, what are some of the influences for you?
So, not your typical horror movie, but Groundhog Day. That was spectacular. They've done the figures on it. He's been about 30 or 40 years in that time loop. He had to lose his mind at one point and go on a killing spree. So I like the idea of resetting the day and forcing them to relive it. And I consider Groundhog Day in the horror genre. But I don't know if you know this movie is called Saturday the 14th.
Yes.
Now that was a good, funny movie. And I enjoyed that one. And that one had the elements of, if you think Friday the 13th was bad, I think that's actually how it opened. Saturday the 14th is worse. And I just kind of like the idea that they took that genre and then moved it over here. And I attempt to do certain things that move from one to the other. Again, though, I turn out being mean and people just think I'm funny. But yeah, Groundhog Day shows up a lot in my stuff. And then my creatures that I like are usually like ghoulies and gremlins and things like that. So they show up a lot. Versions of those. Yeah. Your monster of the week, the Kolchak Night Stalker. And I know I've mentioned that several times on the last one, but yeah, I love those movies and I love those shows.
And Critters. I miss Critters.
And
Troll 2.
Chud.
Kolchak more. Kolchak was great. I should have cited that because I could handle that.
Yeah. Oh, and for Rachel, the Tales of the Crypt had an Arnold Schwarzenegger episode.
It also had Christian Slater in one of the movies, the mummification one.
Yeah.
And that was my I would drop anything to watch something with Christian Slater, even if he got mummified.
So, Samantha, what about you and your influences?
So I think my influences are actually older than me. my earliest exposures to horror were through my mother, my grandmother, and my great grandmother, the three women I spent the most time with, who all had a taste for darkness. And so, I had grim fairy tales told by a German great grandmother, so not your lightened version. And I had old movies like Universal Monsters, kinds of things, and then to move it more into comedy, there was Dark Shadows, which was often not quite intentionally funny. And among those Universal monsters, like Invisible Man remains one of my favorite films, the one with Claude Rains. And I think what it gets is the ludicrousness of the concept doesn't stop it from being scary, because he is nuts and he will do a lot of damage, but he also is a British guy running around naked and it's cold. And there's a lot of inherent comedy in the concept.
Which means he can't do that much damage.
Right, because he'll take some damage himself. Yeah, I mean, nudity is definitely a downside of invisibility as a power.
Walking invisible, it would be a problem because
right? Yeah. Well, one of the ways he gets caught is because he leaves footprints.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah.
So
I think those are the early like horror and horror comedy influences, and I definitely see how it comes about in my own work, where it's not exactly that anything. The way the comedy tends to arise in my horror work when I'm doing it is the ludicrousness of the situation. Like, one of the early horror comedy pieces I wrote was a short story called The Cleaning Lady. And whenever I tell people about that one, I was like, it's all in what you're cleaning, whether this is a horror story or not.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Mm.
I consider it a horror story every week, so I get one.
Yeah.
If you ever need to defeat the Invisible Man, all you need is a flagpole and a deep winter. And you'll be fine.
Oh, I was going to say just a flashlight, because you could do the same thing you could do to an axolotl. No eyelids to block out the light. Blind them. I have way too much science.
The Invisible Man doesn't hold up well to analysis of how that would work.
Yeah.
My daughter, it's a mad science story. Don't look for actual science.
My daughter, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen came out, and so I assigned her all the reading to it, right? Which is where she and I learned how much we hated Jules Verne, and I told her she didn't have to finish because I couldn't.
Yeah.
But here's her book report on Invisible Man. Man figures out how to become invisible, spends the whole time running around being a jerk looking for pants. I'm like, there are no lies in this. There are no lies in this.
And the novel of that one is actually, the comedy didn't just come about in the movie, right? It's actually a very funny novel as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about the nature of the stories we tell, where, the comedy horror story. Because again, much like I've talked about with some of the stories I've written, I've done things to mythical creatures that you can find funny. Had I been doing the same thing to children, people would have looked at me a little cross-eyed. Mm-hmm. People have looked at me funny for some things I've done to mythical creatures. I wrote, and admittedly this particular scene was done as a response to a particular film series that we've already talked about. But the question was, will do vampires sparkle? And the guy goes and says, not unless you roll them in phosphorus before you kick him into the sunlight. Just as he boots one over a cliff into a portal that, he catches fire just enough going through, falls through the portal and drops back into this tent where they're trying to question him. That's the way they're going about questioning him, is they keep kicking him out in the sunlight, falls through a portal, dumps back through, and dumps back into the tent. It's very much we're going to go torture the vampire to get the information we want, but it's that moment of, we roll him in phosphorus first, just because, and that's how they make him sparkle as he bursts into flame on the way down. Some of the times it's the notion of absurdity, sometimes it's the notion of you just have to laugh at the darkest moments. Sometimes it's because comedy is scary, right? Sometimes that thing that you're looking at it is easier to be the person that is standing in the back, stoning the poor neighbor, the person you've known their entire life, but at least it's not you.
Yeah.
So, Layla, what are some of the things that in storytelling you like to play with, work with, see, read, write? How we go about finding that right blend?
I think there's things you can do, especially to a villain character where they're getting their comeuppance, where it's not going to make the reader freak out if the three people who have strung this, villain up like a piñata and have, a barbed wire wrapped baseball bat, a tire iron, and who knows what else, homemade weapon, commenting and saying things as they're, punishing this character who all through the book has caused so many issues, because by the time you get to that scene where he's strung from the tree by a chain and they're literally smacking him with a bat and, let me see how many teeth I can, and they're actually challenging each other, like the scene in Lord of the Rings where Legolas and Gimli are keeping count of how many they kill. These are my bikers going at this, human piñata, but he's done so much damage over the course of the story that the readers are going to laugh along with the bikers and along with what's happening because he deserves it. On the same token, I can't do that to some innocent character that my reader actually likes, because they will never forgive me. So I think it's all about what character it's happening to, how the scene is set up, how many bad things and how much snark the villain got out, in their arc. They have to have had their say. They have to have, gotten some verbal shots in along with the physical ones to earn that final scene where all the snark and all the jokes and all the hatred is aimed at them, because the reader's going to laugh along with it.
What about you, Jenny?
It's a balance, like Layla's saying. Most of the time, my villains, I tend to keep them, their idea of humor is, to twirl a mustache as they tie someone to a railroad track, kind of thing. So they aren't usually funny, though sometimes they're inadvertently funny, but usually not. So usually my heroines, heroes, and everything, they will be making snarky comments usually when, the chips are down and they look like they have the weaker position. Because, one of the rules of comedy is you punch up, you don't punch down. So particularly Kitty, who's the heroine of my Alien series, she's very sarcastic, very snarky, and very, very willing to, nobody intimidates her. They might try to intimidate her, but she's Chumbawamba. She gets knocked down, she gets right back up again. And she does a lot of various kinds of taunting or sarcasm or whatever. In building the balance, it's like you need to have the laugh to release the tension for the reader. Where, they're in a bad situation, and how bad can you don't want to necessarily break your reader. You want your reader to get to take that breath. If Kitty's, if one of my characters is tied up and, being hit, and Kitty calls because she's seeing what's going on, and they have this innuendo-laden stuff wherein he calls her sugar tits and she calls him walrus boy. The aliens that are with her, they're like, walrus boy? I don't get it. And one of these humans is like, well, the walrus is just reputed to have the second largest, right. So, this is really tense. We have 100 people captured by bad guys, and into this, Kitty has everybody go fetch a couple of alligators. And hijinks ensue. Because that's kind of where I go. What would, what's a logical thing for Kitty, and it's never a logical thing for everybody else, that she's going to say as a weapon. And frankly, they're sitting at the Kennedy Space Center in an alligator preserve. get me a couple of gators, right? And it does work. It almost doesn't, but it does. But it's that kind of thing. So it's a balance. I rarely let my bad guys be all that funny unless they are somebody that Kitty's going to flip over to her side. So if you spot a bad guy that appears to have a sense of humor he or she is aware of, there's a really good chance they're going to flip, right? Because Kitty can reach them with humor. So it's all, honestly, for me, it flows, but it's also carefully crafted. So I just want to make sure I have the balance. And you need a lot of good humor when you're about to go kill a bunch of characters people love. So I still hear about it. But yeah.
Ken, what about for you?
I tend to make my bad guys either ridiculous, for instance, a petroleum-style gigantic blob called the Ick that I blow up, or I make the bad guys so irredeemable that you can't wait for them to die in the most horrific way possible. One of these, for instance, is the main character rips out a rib that was kind of poking through the side of the guy and then proceeds to stab him to death with it before lopping off his head and using him as a doorstop. So, that's mean, but people found it funny. I don't know why. But yeah, basically I envisioned a Coca-Cola version of the blob, but made out of petroleum products, and then, leveled a city across the lake, and people for some reason thought that was hilarious. That it blew up with all the gas and fire, and so there's that. And or corrupt politicians. I do a lot of murdering of corrupt politicians.
And everybody cheers every time.
Every time. It's great. But yeah, it's usually that and Karen classes. So in my lit RPG, I have a class called Karen classes and Kyle classes. So the Kyle classes actually, those are the guys who punch the holes in the walls and drink the Red Bulls and scream. And Karens are exactly who you think they are. So they tend to die horrific deaths too. So, but yeah, it's basically, I make them irredeemable.
Samantha?
So the thing I like in horror, whether I'm reading it, writing it, or viewing it, is the subverted expectation. I really like that I thought this is where the danger was, but it's not, it's over there. Or I thought this was the person I needed to watch out for, but he just tripped in a mud puddle, So I definitely like to play with that in my own work as well. Like the bad guy makes a big mistake that then means he's not going to succeed at his plan. And, if I can show him up in a funny way, then that's fun for me. But that's true even in my horror stories that aren't funny, that I just really like to play with. Somebody already mentioned scary children. Scary children are one of my favorite horror themes. Even though I haven't written that many of them yet myself, they're one that I really enjoy when I watch it. And I think that's part of why, is because, I'm a mom. I'm very carefully socialized to think that I need to protect children and to love them and everything. I'm a Gen X woman. I'm not, that surprisingly out of keep. And so when the child ends up being the dangerous thing, when she's the bad seed or she's patient zero or whatever, that's a delight to me, because, and, I've raised enough kids, my own and the ones that I taught, that I know children are actually scary.
Terrifying.
Yeah. But yeah, for me, it's all about subverted expectations. You think you're getting this, you get something else, but you have to be a fairly deft touch with it, because you don't want your reader to predict it too far out. Sometimes having a twist is such an obvious thing that people have guessed your twist because they know you do twist, right? And it also can't feel like a bait and switch. It has to be supported in the story. It can't just come out of left field like, haha, never mind, everybody's purple. Yeah.
I love how it's leading up to the subverted expectation plot twist girl. You know, I've still, to piggyback on what you said, I love subverting. I find that you can just mine great strip mined depths, like, you know, taking the planet Gorman, shattering it levels of depth by subverting expectations. The old classic horror, you have the Minotaur in the labyrinth. That's terrifying, that monster chasing you. But you make it modern, and the friggin' Minotaur's in an IKEA, and all you have to throw at it are these furniture pieces you can't pronounce in different pieces. Or I also basically took the last scene of the Terminator, that plant, you know, with the big, but instead of it being a unkillable robot from the future following these people, it's a turkey. And all you keep hearing is gobble, gobble. But if you keep going and building on it, you have to walk that line between, in your character's head, having their very real fear and knowing it's a turkey. And then when it culminates in the words vegan sausage, and I guarantee you there was meat involved, you know what's going to happen. And I have read that scene multiple times, and I have legit had people both gag, laugh, look at me like I'm the Antichrist, and then buy the book. Sometimes all of them in a row. So I think there comes a point where you either have to be very subtle, very deft, very careful, or you literally have to chase people with the puritanical raised spirit of a sodomized turkey harassing these poor teenagers and make vegan sausage.
Well, that's one way to stuff the turkey. You're welcome. So, looking at bad jokes, because I mean, again, I think this is the other thing that is that hard part, right? Is sometimes you're trying to go for the punchline, but it's how do you really craft and tell the punchline? You know, I mean, because sometimes you've got, you know, it's a couple of sentences that lead up to it. Sometimes it is you write an entire book series just to get down to that one punchline at the end of a series. We all know a couple of people that have been guilty of that. Yes, I'm aware. You're welcome. I set you up for that one. So, but looking at that, you know, that nature of how you go about the setup, and I think this is one of those things, and we've kind of hinted about this, is the notion of telling comedy is hard because you've got to tell a good story. Sometimes that's in one sentence or two. Sometimes that is in a long setup. How do you go about that notion of tell the story, give the setup, and not blow the punchline? So, Jenny.
Well, I want to say one thing about comedy is hard. Part of why comedy is hard is that what makes people laugh is not the same thing. What makes people cry is the same thing. Let me bring out a German Shepherd, and I'm going to tell you, I'm going to put a bullet to this dog's head. There's nothing wrong with it. It's perfectly healthy. I'm just going to kill it. Everyone's going to cry about that. Nobody is, people about getting raged, but nobody feels good about that except, and if they do, that's how we identify some of the psychos in our presence, right? The people who are like, oh, so what? It's a dog. That person you've really got to be careful of. But what makes people laugh is different. That's why hugely successful comedies, you don't always know which ones they're going to be when they come out. It has to be something that hits enough things that more than just a narrow margin can like it. So, you know, there's humor can be very, very subtle all the way up to, you know, ridiculous slapstick and everything in between. So what you're choosing to do has to fit properly with the story you're telling. I'm not a gigantic fan of slapstick, but I can write it well when the scene calls for it. Okay, so it's from a craft standpoint, it really is, you have to be aware of what humor you're going for, what audience are you going for? Are you going for a very broad audience, or are you going for a very narrow audience? Are you telling a joke that has enough layers that all the audiences can get it, right? Or a broader spectrum can get it. And so then when you add that into horror, part of the reason why it can work so well is that, like, I'll use Zombieland as an example. Zombieland is an apocalypse survival movie that's hilarious. And one of the things it does is that we get the little list cardio, right? The double tap. And those come up all the way through. So by the second or third time you see double tap, you're giggling, right? Because you're like, yeah, the double tap. And I use that a lot because I love that movie. So you get a lot of the double tap mentioned in my books. And then there's big payoffs. I mean, the movie's been out for ages now. So the cameo of cameos in that movie, right? And then the death scene of the cameo of cameos is hilarious, right? That's a build, right? That's been talked about the whole way, and that does not disappoint. The cameo doesn't disappoint, and then when you think everything's going to be great, then the death scene of the cameo is funny as well as like, no. So when you wrap it around something like that, the humor comes in because you've made a survivalist thing. Stripes, which stars the cameo of cameos, is we're in the army now, but with jokes, right? Spy, starring Melissa McCarthy, I love that movie. It's hilarious, but it's an excellent spy movie. You could take the jokes out and it stands as a spy movie. And I think that's one of the things when comedy horror works really well, or comedy overlay onto anything. The thing that isn't comedy, if it's strong, your comedic overlay will most likely kill. If your other is weak, then your comedic overlay is likely to bomb or be the only thing keeping it going, versus being a really enjoyable movie. So that's honestly, it's all crap. And it's something that even if we make it look easy, it isn't. Some of us, it comes a little more naturally to than others, but it's still crap. And I hone my jokes like stand-up. I study stand-up, I like stand-up, and I hone my jokes along that. Because it has a build and has a circularity and all this other stuff. But that's crap. Right? So none of this stuff, no one's pulling this out the butt and going, here it is, blah, right? We've all done enough time. Oh, I know you craft, Rachel. Don't you try to lie, girl. Don't you try to lie.
She's still pulling it out of her ass. It's the burrito joke.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but you know what? I bet you worked that joke to make sure it was funny. And that's where craft comes in.
It took a lot of taco hell.
Yeah, but you've got to, again, all of it has to work. You actually have to craft it. So I really think it's one of the things why comedy is hard is because you're crafting, and it's got to be a joke that works for more than you and your bestie. If it's just you and your bestie and you two the only ones laughing, that's a private joke. Nobody else can get it. So, my friends think this is hilarious, and I read them like, none of you are funny. Stop trying, right? If you all think this is hilarious, you need to just choose a different career. So, but it's all crap. So that's my thing. You're just going to hear them a lot. Crap. You really have to practice to get good at it, right? That's and incorporate other techniques and so on and so forth.
Ken, what about for you?
Like you said, it's a lot of his craft. I know I say I luck into a lot of it. Mostly it's for my books anyway, it's the main characters talking about their normal life and their experiences, and to everyone else it's so traumatic that they just can't laugh at it. And as the reader, you're just going, Jesus, okay. So that's kind of what I do with most of my stuff. Like I said, I never really set out to be amusing. I actually thought I was writing fairly serious science fiction and fantasy stuff, and it turns out that I somewhere along the line I got funny, It just doesn't ever relate in actual real life. So, yeah, it's either my sarcasm game is really, really strong in my books, but mostly it's just trauma dumping that people think is funny. You know, like people here have been saying that kids are evil, or could be evil. I think they're perfectly evil. And I refer to them in real life as crotch goblins. You know, I will refer to my friends, and they're never happy with me when I do it, but I still do it. It's, how are your little crotch goblins today? You know, and did that through my 20s and 30s, and none of them were happy with me. Now they laugh about it, but, back then they found it rather insulting.
No, they were just living with the evil.
Well, yeah. That Stephen King movie, Salem's Lot, or Pet Cemetery, the Chumbawamba kid, I get knocked down, I get back up, Yeah, I have never wanted kids, and I am glad I never had to raise one. So I have no interest. I don't like them. They're fine so long as they're somebody else's and they stay away. But yeah, so mostly, like I said, I understand that it's mostly writing the same thing, and I guess my sarcasm was a lot stronger than I thought it was. But I actually never intended to be funny, which is, I guess, even funnier.
Samantha, how about for you?
So I think there's a reason that most of my horror is short, and it's the right level of tension and when to release it and when to hold it is difficult to maintain in a longer work. And I feel like in a short story, it's more like there's this one particular tension point we're building to, instead of having to have like 8 ones that keep getting bigger and bigger until we get to the really, really big one at the end. So I think that is part of why my horror so far is short. I have a couple of ideas for some longer pieces. We'll see if I have the energy and wherewithal to get there with them. But I think the big thing I work on building is contrast. Like humor is funnier contrasted with something that isn't funny. And horror is scarier contrasted with something that isn't scary. And I think this is part of why horror comedy works. And, I already mentioned they both play on surprise, and, they both can benefit from kind of a shock value, right? It's shocking when there's like sudden gore on the screen. It's also shocking when somebody says something really mean and then you find yourself laughing at it and you're like, oh no, especially if you think of yourself as a nice person. So,
we're writers. None of us are nice, much less kind.
But yeah, I think the main thing I'm trying to do is set up that contrast. And even in my horror stories that stay horror stories, there have to be moments that aren't horror, right? There's the ordinary before it gets disrupted by the scary. So you have to kind of establish that baseline that you have for contrast when the funny or scary or funny and scary at the same time things start to happen. So contrast.
Rachel?
Well, Gini outed me faster than watching the Rocky Horror Picture Show when I was 13, man. I do actually study a lot of craft. I've actually studied comedy craft and distilled probably thousands of hours of comedy routines. And when you're writing comedy, you lack one thing that visual and oral mediums lack. You don't have necessarily a voice. You have your writing voice, but everyone who's reading it is going to be reading it their interpretation of it. So it takes a lot of practice, a lot of workshopping, a lot of refining to get something that no matter how much, but no matter how much most people read it, it's going to land. And that is definitely a skill. But one thing you either have a choice. You can go to that diamond's edge point. You can really refine, or one of my other big influences was MST3K. And in the MST3K model, you're not trying to land every joke with every person. It's more of a shotgun approach to comedy. That if you have enough funny moments of enough different types and you have enough skill set built, something's going to land, and that can improve your craft overall. So I will be serious for a minute and say that no, it does not just spring from your loins like Athena and you magically get comedy. But if you listen to comedy a lot and you read a lot and you practice a lot, it will become natural, and then it will come off the cuff much easier.
Mm-hmm.
Layla?
I think first for me is it can't fall flat in my head and it can't be forced. So like if the character says something and I can tell they're trying to be funny and it's falling short, we don't even go ahead and write that. We just ignore their hopping around like little chaos gremlins in the back of my head and go on to the next character. But if, it pops into my head and they're, yapping in there and I start giggling, especially if I giggle enough to like get the cat to look at me, then it's like, okay, we're putting that on the page and we're going to keep going with that, line of dialogue. It just has to be natural and it has to fit the moment. Like you can't just shoehorn it in because you want to have like a funny moment lighten up your scary. It's got to be the right character in the right scene in the right moment. And if a character who's known for like one word answers starts spitting out a 3-line, bunch of words just to be funny, the reader's going to be like, he hasn't talked that much in a freaking chapter. Why is he spitting out, half a paragraph just trying to be funny? Like, it doesn't fit. So, it really has to fit the moment, the character, and it has to hit right. Yep. It's got to hit right.
Well, and I'm going to steal a little bit here from the South Park guys. Trey Parker, Matt Stone. There's a class they actually taught on writing comedy, but I think that it applies very much into this. There's a piece from their storytelling because again, I think we can agree a lot of the time South Park is comedy horror, right? If anybody else was doing many of those things, it would be horrific. It's a tone change that's between absurd comedy and horror, and I think it's a lot of what we've been covering. And that part of it is their storytelling, and I think we see this in a lot of the things we've talked about, is not this happened and this happened and this happened, but this happens, which causes this to happen, which causes this to happen, which causes this to happen. And it's that accumulation of events, occurrences, and repercussions. And in that, it's that one, the one small bad decision or the one decision made or the one comment, as things build and accumulate, often that's where the absurdity is because had you just made the one different choice, had you decided not to go skinny dipping in the lake, full of alligators,
it's an amazing course.
Yes.
Is it still skinny dipping if you're wearing the heels?
If that's all you're wearing. So
well, only if they're skinny heels. It will not work with
stilettos.
Stilettos.
But not chunks. Yeah.
Chunky heels don't count.
But when you look at that aspect of storytelling, we're talking about things like Zombieland, when we're looking at Dale and Tucker versus Evil, these stories that are just on one layer, it's the absurdity, but it's actions and repercussions, and the twists usually come because of whatever the one little thing is you didn't know played up for the hit. So, as with anything, we've covered a lot of ground. I think we've torn the stories apart up and down, but there's still a ton of stuff we haven't touched on. So I want to give everybody that chance to, what's something maybe we need to dive into a little further, something we haven't talked about, a thought you've got. So this is that kind of open-ended. So, Ken, I'm going to go with you first. What's something we haven't hit on or something you think we need to hit on a little bit more?
Clowns.
Killer clowns from outer space. Jenny's favorite.
I love that movie. Oh God, we're proving a thing.
Yeah, no, yeah. If you like it, 99% chance I'm terrified of it or hate it. Yes.
It is that I will side with Rachel on this one. It is not terrifying. It is hilarious.
No, it's not.
It is hilarious.
So funny.
It is the funniest
part of it. So I couldn't watch it anymore.
It's not quite as comedic as Saw. That to me is still the funniest movie I've ever seen. But.
That's just torture porn.
Where are the Scooby-Doo people? Okay, I'm on the wrong panel.
Sorry.
I like Scooby-Doo too. I mean, everybody likes Scooby, but Killer Clowns from Outer Space, there's a certain amount of ridiculousness that is absolutely needed that goes beyond just your regular comedy horror and just gets into stupid. And that's where Killer Clowns in Outer Space comes into play. It's an amazing movie. But I mean, honestly, I love turning in the things that are supposed to be sweet and innocent into the most vile things on the planet. Look at Ronald McDonald, for instance. He's killed more than almost anything else that you've ever known of. Probably more than cancer. Ronald McDonald is vicious.
Well, and then think about the Ronald McDonald characters we had in the 70s. They were all terrifying.
Had the Hamburglar and all that. That was great.
I had a crush on the Hamburglar, but I was weird.
So much is explained. Right.
Yes.
So yeah, I think taking it ridiculousness and turned into something funny. So that's it.
So Samantha, what about for you? What have we got?
So I think I've always thought it's kind of interesting how comedy and horror are often both gross. And it's interesting how the same thing happening can be funny or can really be horrifying, depending on how it's presented, what exactly happens in the moment. Like, in Ghostbusters, ending up covered in slime is funny because there's no lasting repercussion and his response afterwards is funny. But then you take something like The Substance, which I would argue is still dark comedy, but the moment where she's like climbing out of her own body, I wasn't laughing. That was pretty horrifying. But then, later in the movie when the body horror is amped up to a ridiculous level, then I was laughing, with the extra body things all over and everything. I was like, wow. So
she was finally beautiful.
Who was it? One of you talked about how humor is so individual. Like, what one person's going to think is funny is not what somebody else is going to think is funny. And so, I don't have any deep thoughts about it. I just think it's interesting how often in both comedy and horror, something disgusting happens.
Well, and I think that's a good example because, I mean, again, part of it with Ghostbusters, right? We're talking Slimer here, was meant to look like Jim Belushi because they wanted him in the film and he died just before they were getting ready to go to filming. So, in fact, just days before going to principal with the Slimer, they were like, yeah, we need him to look more like Belushi because it was both an homage to Belushi, but there's a lot to that kind of buried into that too, just into the story. So Rachel, what about for you? What have you got?
I have to piggyback because Samantha and I keep sharing a brain tonight. Bodily functions are universal constants. We all have them, we all understand them, and it's one of the few ways that almost across language, age, culture, a fart joke can be funny, and blood can be disgusting, and you can somehow reverse them. Because everyone understands them. So they actually can be a touchstone in both horror and comedy. And we like to think, oh, we're so cerebral. We're so above this. Oh, come on. There were dick jokes in ancient Rome. We as human beings need to accept that there are universal constants and we can use them both to terrify or we can use them to make people laugh.
Layla?
We can parody both of them so well. Like, a parody of horror can still have moments of a jump scare, still have creepy moments, but then the payoff, instead of like being blood and guts and gore and the monster with the axe, is somebody behind the door who's like drunk and accidentally got their shirt hooked on a coat rack and is kind of stuck there. When you pull the door, they're just like, hey, can you get me another beer? You can parody these horror scenes into something fun, but you can also take a comedy and turn it into a horror just by twisting some, scene that's supposed to be outlandishly funny, and then having, the character who the joke is supposed to be played off on get her hair trapped in the escalator, and now we've got the horror of the ripping, and we've got body horror right there in a moment in what was supposed to be a funny scene. So I think the fact that we can parody both so well and then merge them, in different ways makes it fun to play with, like even more fun to play with than, some other genres or one standalone genre. Because now you've got two genres that not only are juxtapositions of one another, but you've got two genres that, like you were saying earlier, Jim, once you get them rolling, it's like a juggernaut. One thing plays off another, and you can roll through an hour and 45 minutes playing off each, scenario. Final Destination, we make all kinds of jokes about, what does this look like when you're behind the log truck? It's a Final Destination moment. But I'm sorry, I laughed my ass off. Half the deaths in those movies, because really, come on, it was the most absurd, absolutely ridiculous series of events that took place. It was like Marble Run for horror. Let me set up the most craziest trick to see if we can pull it off. Oh yeah, he survives this, that, and the other thing, doesn't get his hand caught, but he dies because the air conditioner falls out the window and kills him. Come on.
So, and also, I just since you're talking Final Destination, I saw a thing the other day, have not vetted it, but there was an article basically showing where the movie theater showing Final Destination had the ceiling collapse.
Yep.
That's that meta moment, like, are we really in a simulation, and just somebody like me has that sense of humor?
Yeah. And do you laugh? You don't laugh. You don't laugh. It's horrible. It's tragedy. But you have that one moment. And it's that one moment where if you expand it greater and you're in the safety of fiction, you can play.
Oh, no, I laughed. I'm a sick
I laughed, too. I just laughed.
Because, again, that's one of those moments of absurdity in real life that means that absurdity in film is plausibility. So, Jenny, I'm going to give you the last word.
My last word is Jabberwocky. Monty Python came out with a movie after Holy Grail, where now they're winning. They're like the funniest people on the planet. My mother and I go to see it. I'm a younger teenager when this comes out. And I'm like, I can't wait. She goes, it's not a comedy. I said, oh, it's Monty Python. She's like, it's not a comedy. And I'm like, no, it's going to be so funny. She's like, it's not a comedy. And I'm like, uh-huh, sure. I get in there and very, very early scene. There's a woodsman out there, some peasant, hacking away at stuff, and some monster gets him, and all you see is his torso, and he's making all the funny faces, and the entire audience is laughing. Everyone except my mother. And when the scene pans out, he's dropped to the ground, and everything below this is smoke and bones. And the entire theater went, and my mother leaned over and said, I told you, it's not a comedy. Right? And because I was like that too. It wasn't a comedy. There were funny bits. Like she gave me a potato. Oh my gosh, she really loves you. Right? There wasn't a comedy. It was a very strong takedown on, medieval good and bad and all this other stuff. And there's a lot of politics in there and everything else. It was the opposite of Monty Python. Holy Grail. So, when you cut off your arm. It's a flesh wound, just merely a scratch. Come on, I'll take it. I've cut off your arms and legs. It's nothing. Come back here, I'll bite you to death, right? That's hilarious. And then you get to Jabberwocky. That wasn't funny anymore. And I learned from that, make sure you know what it's supposed to be. And also be prepared for that switch, because Jabberwocky went from comedy to horror in a moment. And that moment was the pan out. And it was really well done. And it was, like you said, I think it was the first few minutes of the movie. So that's the Pythons telling you, oh, by the way, Jimmy's mother is correct. This isn't a comedy, just in case you weren't sure, you morons. But yeah, so to me, Jabberwocky, that moment is the perfect juxtaposition of that was funny until it wasn't. And I think that's some of the stuff with comedy horror, is that it can be funny until it isn't. It can be horror until it isn't. So, I mean, I think those are things that, when done well, the Jabberwocky was done absolutely for effect, to basically knock it out of your head that this is a comedy in the fastest, most horrifying way possible. But the blend of that is, it's the tone you as the filmmaker, as the writer, as the artist creating it, you make the decision on how your tone's going to be, and you want to keep your tone correct for your piece, whether it's short, like Samantha, I mostly only write short horror. I can't maintain it longer than that. I can't be in that world longer than short fiction, keeping in mind that I love my monsters and they usually win. So, but yeah, so I think your shock value is always there, really high with comedy horror, and you, the artist, are making the decision on how much shock and how much value.
Well, now that we've terrified the entire audience, but let's make sure everybody knows where to find you guys. Website, social media, and of course, what is that little touch of horror that somebody needs to have in their to-be-read pile? So, Samantha, you're up first.
So, like I said, most of my horror is short, so you'll find it in anthologies and magazines. If you're looking for one you can read real quick for free, I had a story called Hello Flesh on Horror Sleaze Trash recently, and it is a bit of horror comedy that you might enjoy. And then upcoming this fall, I've got 2 horror stories in anthologies. One of them's called She Cries in the Night. It'll be in an anthology called Behind the Shadows. And the other one is called Say My Name, and it's in a workplace horror anthology called Dread Mondays. So yeah, that's where you can find my upcoming horror. And you can find me if you know my name. My website is my name, SamanthaBryant.com. And if you Google me, just make sure you put the word author, because otherwise you're going to get an actress, and I'm not quite that sparkly.
Rachel?
Well, if you want to find me online, I do have a website, RachelECarr.com, because Rachel Carr writes vegan cookbooks, and you don't want to confuse us. And on all the socials, I am at Total Recar, which sums up a lot of my humor. If you want to read me actually write serious horror for a very rare change, I am in the Dark Spores horror anthology that was just released by Crone Girls
I'm in
Press.
that one too.
With Samantha, yes, you can get a twofer. We do share a brain, can't help it. But if you want to, understand the pinnacle of my horror comedy, you can read my highest rated Authors and Dragons Shingles series entry, Cluck You, with an exclamation point, and you can find out how the vegan sausage is made.
Layla?
Well, you can find me at Layla Dorine at Wix.com. You can find me at Rainbow Lyrics and Mellow Mushrooms. I'm getting a little better at Instagram. I'm finally doing a little on TikTok. My last thing that drove into the realm of horror was Roadhouse Reds, which has been out for several years now. You can find it on Amazon. It's actually in the middle of being made into an audiobook at the moment. And I do have an upcoming release in 2 days. It is a rock star romance, not a lot of horror in there, except the moment when they are chased through Palm Springs by a mob of fans. So check that one out. And it is also actually already being made into an audiobook, even though we haven't released the ebook yet.
Jenny?
GiniKoch.com. If you want to join my free newsletter, hook me up. You can do so from the information at the bottom of most of the pages of that website. I'm all over Facebook. I'm also on X, Twitter, Blue Sky, Pinterest. My most recent release, I had a book birthday today. A Cup of Joe by me writing as Anita Ensall. That's post-apocalyptic science fiction where they don't know they're in a post-apocalypse. And my other most recent release was Media and Me. My love-hate relationship with Hollywood was from Gingerbread Publishing. And I just have to brag, this released #1 in 3 categories. It's my first #1 in 3 categories. I was super excited. And I actually do just reviews of movie and television shows, including a couple of horrors, because I tossed, my level of that in there.
Ken?
You can find me at kenlangeauthor.com, and Lang was spelled with an E at the end, and Facebook, a few other places. And if you need to find if you like vampires, you would want to pick up Dawning. And if you just want general horror, all my books will work. It was totally unintentional, but it's there. And so, yeah, Lit RPG and or the science fiction stuff will all bring you amusement and horror spots throughout all of it.
And you can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentialsworkshops.com, creatingpros.com, and of course here at ConTinual, where we're just trying to make, poor devs funny. So we'll see you again next time.